Hi,
Good.
Haven. How are you?
Hi, Amanina. I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm so excited to be talking with you.
Yeah, and about Eleanor, no less. So, uh,
Right.
that's something that, of course, is very dear to you, and uh,
Absolutely. Yes.
probably something a lot more should be known about than is known. So, right. So, I guess I'll get right into my questions I've got for you. Which is the first one is right away. Just what stuck with you about Eleanor the most? So what's your most fond memory and what had the greatest impact on you personally?
I think my most fond personal memory is just being around her. She was kind and gentle. She was very funny. Um, and she sort of let people do their thing or talk if they wanted to talk. She was not an imposing person. So I think just being around her was my most
Hmm.
personal thing that I remember and enjoyed and have carried through the rest of my life. Um, the most kind of important, sort of more public things are what she stood for, her morality, her values, her constant learning and trying to understand others. Um, and that also is something I've tried and probably failed to carry also.
Well, I personally have noticed it, so it's definitely not a complete failure, at least.
Thanks,
So,
but
yeah,
you're biased.
I might be biased, but I do feel like you're very open-minded. I find you to be very funny and yeah, just a very kind person, just as you described Eleanor being countless times. I mean, also in your book, you constantly would write about how Eleanor tried to take everyone's feelings into account and tried to uh, find the best solution for as many people as possible. Is this the same mentality also what you think is the most important thing for people today to just realize about Eleanor and continue to practice?
Yeah, particularly as we are in the world we are in, which is a very different world, and our cultures have shifted and changed and whatever. But if you just sort of look at what she stood for, that's what we need to constantly be reminded of. And it's not just um, Grandmere, it's other leaders and other people as well, but standing for the rights of human individuals to be able to express themselves without fear, the rights of humans to respect and care about one another, and then culturally to accept and work with, have respect for other cultures, other ways of thinking, and communicate. And those are the kinds of things that she did constantly. When she was able to pull together the Declaration of Human Rights, it
Mm.
was because she spent hours talking with leaders from other cultures who did not respect women and couldn't imagine any kind of universal right that would include women. But she managed to get them to sign off on a declaration of universal, including women and all people of all colors, that they had rights. And it was largely because she, and this is what I think we need to pass on to every generation, the ability to listen, to try to understand, to try and learn. enough so that you can understand. And I think those were the things that made her the person she was, and that her legacy. I mean, she was a long time ago, but your generation and your children's generation and other generations to come, those are basic human values that should never be lost.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, d definitely. So, I mean, I guess I'm wondering also, just since I'm now in roughly the age category that you were in during that time where Eleanor was drafting that Declaration of Universal Human Rights, and where she's also traveling around the world to figure out solutions in the Middle East, for instance, and things like that. So did that in any way affect your school life and your life as, for instance, I would be experiencing it right now? Because,
No.
naturally, being the granddaughter of such a big diplomatic deal, or such an important person, is probably going to have some repercussions for you in your school life as well.
That's interesting question, and it's funny because I, for the longest time, and I hate to admit how stupid and naive I was, I thought everybody was a Roosevelt. I mean, everybody I knew had the same name, so it was like Smith or Jones or something like that. I didn't. I knew that FDR was famous, but it didn't all sort of coalesce until I became a little older. When I traveled with her, I realized that people revered her. But at school, well, I went to public school in Hyde Park, and there my schoolmates, I don't think they even. I mean, we went to well, our elementary school was named something else, but we were in junior high, and it was the FD Roosevelt, high school, and they
Oh.
combined high school and junior high because there weren't that many people then. But nobody sort of, I don't think, maybe they did pay attention, but I didn't feel as if they did. The only thing I knew was that I was supposed to get good grades. But uh, I mean, if I paid attention, yes, I could get good grades. The rest of the time, I had a friend and we played a lot of hooky. And I think probably my name then allowed me not to get in a lot of trouble for playing hooky. But anyway, I mean, the woods were there, and that we could ice skate in the winter, and it was much more fun to be outside than in school. Later in school, I went to school with a lot of um, people who they also, had prominent families. And I think I didn't think they cared one way or the other. Now, when I traveled with Grandmere, then I realized how um, far-reaching her, not even so much what she did, but her love and caring for others, how far-reaching that was. We were in Iran, and we were going to visit Persepolis. And on the way, there was a well-known sort of hut. And it literally, it was sort of like an igloo shape. It was a round hut. And this blind man, lived in this hut. And the custom was that when people drove by, they would leave food for him, and that's how he survived. Now he's blind, so he can hear, but he doesn't see. We pulled up, and we had brought a picnic, and we were going to have our picnic with him at this hut. And so my grandmother got out of the car. I was with my Aunt Anna and her husband, James Halstead. And we got out of the car, and my grandmother walked towards the man and said something to him in her voice. And suddenly he's on his knees and he's grabbing the hem of her skirt. and saying, "Oh, Mrs. Roosevelt, you came to visit me." He knew without seeing, by the sound of her voice, who she was. And tears just were pouring out of his eyes. That's when I mean, that had such a huge effect on me. And to this day, I mean, I could practically draw the whole situation for you. She, I knew then that people revered her the world over. And that had a huge effect because I realized that they revered her for the right reasons, not just because she was, maybe a great actress or something like that, but because she was a true human being who cared.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I remember reading about that story, and
Yeah.
that was honestly quite impressive. I mean, first of all, recognizing someone by their voice and then showing such a strong reaction. Of course, that's quite going to make quite an impression, and even more importantly, that was, I believe, your first trip with Eleanor Roosevelt, and in that
Well, the
case,
first long one. I'd been
first,
on short trips. We'd gone to Campobello together, and
Mhm.
she was always taking me, oddball places. Like one spring, she decided, "Oh, Nina, let's go get on the Circle Line in New York City," which was a boat that goes around Manhattan. Um,
Oh yeah.
goes from the East River to the West Side and all that. And it was just kind of spur of the moment. "Oh, come on, let's go." And so we get on the
I
Circle
remember.
Line,
I remember.
and
I
off
seem
we
to remember
go.
that got her in trouble with your parents later down the line when she would just decide that you were going somewhere, and your parents were like, "No, no, 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 you're not taking them there."
Well, my parents, I think, just sort of realized that I was going to do pretty much whatever she allowed me to do.
Okay.
That it wasn't I was skirting my parents all the time. Now, don't you do that, but but I did it a lot.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, so basically, back to my original question, just essentially there's not a lot of talk about it in school because so the way I'm imagining this is, at least in my case now, we're of course talking a lot about just political events, geopolitical events, and naturally back then the only real two sources of information you had were or maybe three information sources were the people around you, may the newspaper, and then the radio. And then aside from those things, I mean, television wasn't really too developed of a medium yet to convey information. So I somehow am imagining that people would ask you about whatever's happening geopolitically, especially since just Eleanor would be at the forefront of whatever's going on there.
It's interesting because I think just because my last name was Roosevelt, they thought I knew all sorts of things about politics that I didn't know.
Okay.
And
Uh-huh.
within the family, we didn't really talk about everything that was going on, or sometimes all the things that she was doing. Now, and it's in a sense, it's kind of uh, too bad, but it's kind of the way life is, I think. People like Adlai Stevenson would come for a weekend, or various hotshot politicians would come, and it was always about, "Oh, uh, the weather is really nice," or "Let's go swimming," or "Let's go walk in the woods." I mean, there really very few times. I only remember one or two times when people came with serious, "We have to talk about various political issues." And then we could figure out kind of what was going on. But we were kids. So kids were not, they were kind of pushed
Yeah.
aside. But I will say that I know that particularly during the civil rights, any civil rights leaders that came, they were more about business. And we're going to
Mhm.
talk about how we promote civil rights. And I know Grandmere was very much in favor of not going too fast, not pushing things, but
Mhm.
to just be consistent and and at one point she did say, you can't change things overnight. You're going to have to keep working at it and in small ways to build towards a more equal society. And so typically the civil rights leaders that came, we would know that was all. I mean, they would come for fun for a weekend,
Mhm.
and they were certainly, and that was the wonderful thing growing up. I had not a clue that there was any real difference between the color of anybody's skin. I mean, I knew the differences, sure, but there were so many differences to me
Okay.
that I was just one shade of many shades. So I didn't have this sense of until I was older. Then I realized
Yeah.
um, what a horrible time I'd been born during. So
Well,
I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
it's not requested, but I think it's a very valuable lesson to learn that during that time it really was not a given that you'd respect someone with a different skin color the same way you'd respect someone who was white.
mhm.
And however, I am kind of curious. So, whenever there weren't any political hotshots or diplomatic envoys at Ballakil, what was the day-to-day life just like growing up there?
it was it was idyllic. I mean, I was so fortunate because when nobody was there, well, I'd ask Marge, the cook, how many people are coming for dinner tonight? And she would say, oh, 10. And I'd say, oh, nobody's here and nobody's coming. So on the weekend or on the times when there weren't many guests, now there was always somebody around. Grandmare's secretary would often be there staying, but um, our daily life during the summer was literally my cousins. I have some second cousins. My grandmother's niece was very close to my grandmother, and she and her children came every summer for 4 to 6 weeks. So there were four of them, and there were four of us, and I. So we were the crew, and we were responsible for picking all the vegetables. We were responsible for keeping our road was probably about half a mile long, maybe. And it was dirt. We were responsible for all the potholes. We were responsible for bringing wood in for the winter. So we worked. I used to call us the slave contingent because, but then of course our parents would say, yeah, slaves, and you have a swimming pool you can go swim in, you have a this, and you have a that. Oh, yes, okay, we do. But
I think that discussion never gets old. I mean, that's
right,
probably still very, very present even now.
right, I'm sure, particularly from your father.
Yeah, yeah, it's always do these chores, and I'm thinking I just want to relax and not have to still mow the lawn, hang up the laundry, and do X, Y.
Right,
Yeah,
you're
I think
right.
that's something that never changes.
But well, anyway, but then when Grandmere was around in the summertime, she would very often her mornings were spent answering mail and that kind of thing. And she had an office which we called Tommy's living room, and Grandmere had her desk in there. And on rainy days, we would go in there because that was the only television that was on the place, so that we could watch television. But
Mm.
and Grandmere would put her hearing aids in or take
I
her hearing
remember you
aids
telling me about this.
out,
Yes.
and we could make all sorts of noise. We could play all sorts of games and
Yeah.
have pillow fights, and she was oblivious to it, and which was lovely because any other adult would have kicked us out, and then what would we do? But ours was kind of, if you have that feeling of, oh, there's nothing to do, there was too much to do. so
Oh.
so our daily life with Grandmere too was we always had breakfast at about 9. Now, I used to get up early and go walking with her. I could hear her as soon as she got up, which was usually, I don't know, 7:30, 8 maybe. And I'd hear her go out her door and start calling the dogs. And so I would race out of our house, and the two of us would go off into the woods and walk. And then I'd come back and we'd have breakfast. But on the walk, she was always showing me, um, oh, Queen Anne's lace, which is a really pretty, it's a weed, but it's gorgeous. And then salamanders and all kinds of things. Usually, as it got warmer, then the bugs came out. So then we would, make sure we got home before the mosquitoes and the various other bugs started biting us. And then she'd work in the morning, and then we'd have lunch over on the patio by our house, and they'd bring the lunch from her house, and sometimes we would contribute, but mostly it was her cook and people that brought the lunch, and we'd all be outside, having a lovely lunch. Very often we went on picnics. Grandmere was big on picnics, so we'd go all sorts of places to have a picnic. And then in the afternoon, she would put on her bathing suit, which was very old fashioned and pretty ugly. And she would come over to the pool, and she would have a towel, and she'd put the towel down on the ground, and then she'd get down on the towel and she'd lie in the sun for about 3.5 to 5 minutes. Then she would get up and she'd
Okay.
put on one of those awful bathing caps,
swimming caps.
right, to keep your hair. And then she would stand at the deep end of the pool, and she'd put her hands together, and her knees would be bent, and she would bounce 3 times and then do a belly flop into the pool. And it was hysterical. And we all knew when she wanted to swim, we got out of the pool because we were raucous and we were always playing all these, games. And so any normal person would not be able to swim because they'd be hit by one of us doing a cannonball or something like that. So we would watch her, and then she would swim to the shallow end and then get out, shake herself off, dry herself, lie back down on the towel for another 3.5 to 5 minutes. Then she'd get up and go back to her house and either read or do more work or, return phone calls or whatever. Then we always had dinner at usually 7:30-ish. And I would have rather eaten over at her house all the time. But sometimes, and a lot of the times, we did eat there. The food wasn't always great because she didn't care until Marge and Les Entrup came. Then the food got good. Before them, the food was really pretty awful. But Grandmere had we decided that she'd lost all of her taste buds somewhere or never had them. But eating was just because you had to eat. She was much more interested in the discussion at the table. So we would discuss not so much everyday events, but we would discuss sometimes literature, sometimes just ideas. And it was really fun. And then after dinner, she would read us stories. The adults would have coffee. Oh, and we always had tea. Ooh, I almost forgot. At 3:30 to 4, everybody got out, all the kids got out of the swimming pool. We had to take off our bathing suits and put on dry clothes. And we'd go over by Grandmere's house. She had a really lovely sort of shady place by her house. And that was where we had tea. And she would read to us. We had juice and cookies. And I always wanted, sometimes Bernard Baruch would send her cookies, but they were always rum cookies. And I didn't like rum cookies. So I liked it when they had other kinds of cookies. But and we tried to get her to tell Mr. Baruch to send some other kind of cookie, but of course she wouldn't do that, and I don't blame her. But anyway, so then she would read to us a lot of times during tea, and then after dinner, while the adults had coffee, she would read to us, and she would focus on what we might want to talk about, which was interesting. So the adults were kind of pushed into the background a little bit, which was interesting. And we didn't really notice it because then they often would stay up later anyway. But it was really just, it was quite a routine, and in a sense it had this sort of European flavor to it, because we always had finger bowls at dinner. So it was, there was a tiny bit of formality that was still there, and everything was, we knew you could project what was going to happen. There wasn't any kind of running in and out and that sort of stuff. But and it was really, I mean, I can't imagine a better way of being. And we were in some sense feral children. I mean, there wasn't anybody, or other than telling us what jobs we had to accomplish. But I don't think our parents had a clue what we were doing most of the time. So
Yeah. So, I mean, you just said that Eleanor was usually interested in talking about what you were talking about. Just out of a personal curiosity, would that be similar to what children nowadays would talk about with their grandparents, or generally would talk about? So just like school stuff, school problems, or I
yeah,
guess
well,
what's on
it's
their
sort of
mind.
like when I'm interrogating you about what you're thinking.
It's essentially the same thing. Yeah.
Right, because
Uh,
and I've done that to you, and I thought, oops, maybe I shouldn't do that. But
well,
because I mean, she wanted to know what we were thinking about.
mhm. Yeah. I mean I think that goes for a lot of grandparents, and I personally don't mind at all. I appreciate that. And love to talk about what's on my mind, maybe a little too much at times, but oh well. Yeah. So then generally I just I guess I should go back to how Eleanor was more in a professional setting, because you didn't just experience, like, did you experience two sides of her whenever there was someone there, or when you were alone,
That
or was
is
it always the same authentic person?
that is an excellent question, Haven, because so many people have their public persona and their private persona. Hers and my father was definitely that way, so I recognize it immediately.
Hmm.
Hers, no, she was the same in her living room, with nobody there, as she was in having lunch with the Shah of Iran, or having tea with the Queen of England. And I also saw that particularly in Iran, when we visited very poor rug makers. And when we went into this one family's house, you couldn't even really call it a house, a shack. And he was a rug maker, and it was a part of Shiraz where they had a street full of rug makers. They were all up and down the street. And we went into his home, and it was one room. He had a wife, and we saw 3 children. And they were behind a curtain, which curtained off part of this one room. And there was no furniture. There were cushions to sit on. So we sat on the floor on a cushion of some sort. And the woman brought in coffee and some fruit things. And my grandmother, and then she disappeared. And my grandmother treated the gentleman that we were visiting the same way she would treat a head of state. And she talked about his business and how he was trying to export rugs to the United States and all the things that were involved with that. And then she wanted to talk with his wife. Well, that's not done in those days in Iran. But she convinced him that she really needed to meet the wife and to thank her for this lovely coffee. Now, providing us with coffee and any kind of fruit would have been at least a couple of weeks worth of salary. I mean, they didn't have. Yeah. So we were always very careful. And Grandmere never told me this. I sort of picked it up watching her. Fortunately, they would serve in little demi-tasse, tiny cups. And so we would just sip it and make sure that we didn't ask for a second or leave, you emptied your coffee cup at the end of the meeting, not anywhere before. Otherwise, they would feel they had to refill it. And then you would take just maybe a small piece of fruit. And because that would have been impolite not to. And then Grandmere would thank the family, and she did talk with the wife finally and was allowed to meet the children. But and then we learned that this particular rug maker told us that the rugs that they were going to try and ship to America, they would put the rugs out on the street so all the horses and carts would walk over them and make them look used, because Americans wanted antique things and they could get a higher price.
Okay, that's interesting. So, at least he's business savvy. At least he is very savvy. So what you're saying essentially is not only was she the same in a professional setting as she was when no one was around, but also she was trying to speak about whatever was on a person's mind, regardless of it being her granddaughter or some very, very poor rug maker who, of course, he's probably going to have very different problems to what Eleanor has, but she still always tried to get inside people's heads in that sense.
Yeah, and the thing that impressed me so much is we did that a lot. I mean, that was the main thing when Grandmere traveled. Yeah, she went to museums and stuff like that. And there was always some either statue or some art she wanted to show me particularly. And that was really fun because she would have, thought about it. And so we would do that. And she was interested. I mean, she was, broadly interested in the culture, particularly of the Persian culture in Iran. And she knew that the Americans had, which I did not know at the time, I learned later, but a part of our family actually was part of overthrowing one of their leaders when the
Oh,
Americans um, overthrew Mossadegh. And
yeah.
anyway, she 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 always wanted to see everything she could: hospitals, schools, rug makers, because that was a big thing in Iran, Iranian textile, farming. We went to, several farms. We learned about where they got their tractors from and how they use the
Yeah, I can
tractors.
remember that.
Yeah,
Right.
and the thing is, and then she would take all that information, and then when she met, and in this case, when we met with the Shah and all of his henchmen at this big long table for lunch, she just peppered them with, "You haven't done this, you haven't done that, your people are suffering here," and
Yeah.
she, in her same
Yeah.
calm, kind, thoughtful tone. So it was as if she was talking with the Shah or the poor rug maker sitting on the floor. I mean, it just blew me away.
Yeah, I mean that's very impressive. I also remember that, and I guess this is also very very current when you look at it, that she visited this I guess it was a siege leader or something or other. It was one of the leaders of the Arab tribes in
Oh,
what is
oh,
now sort of
yes.
Israel and Palestine, and of course tried to get their side of the story while she was in Israel to see how the Arabs and Israelis could coexist there, because of
Mhm.
course that was very very new, and all that was uh,
Yeah.
developing
Right.
at the
Yeah. Sheikh Suleiman. And he proposed marriage to her because he
right,
wanted
right,
her to be
yes.
part of his harem.
Yeah.
Because he was horrified that the Americans would allow a woman to travel by herself and without protection. So, but yeah, no, and I still have a camel blanket that he gave me when we were there.
Mm.
So if you ever have a camel, I have a blanket for it.
Okay. Well, I mean, you had a camel once, but I don't
I
know if I
did.
would get so lucky.
Yeah, it never managed to get to the US, but
Oh, yeah, it caused a diplomatic crisis though,
it,
so.
it did. It was so funny because the United States State Department said, or Health Department, somebody said, "Oh, Israel, you can't bring a camel in because Israel has hoof and mouth disease." Well, Israel's government then got most upset and quite irate. "We do not have hoof and mouth disease. That's other places, not here." So,
Mhm.
so it was, but anyway, the camel then did go to a Bedouin who had just gotten married and didn't have any money or any way to take his goods to market. So the camel did, I'm sure, have a good life doing what
It
he's supposed to
definitely
do.
ended up helping people.
Yeah.
Probably a lot more than if it had come to the
Oh, if
US.
it come to Hyde Park, I mean, well, my father had informed me that I would be responsible for all fees involved with the camel. And so I was
Mm,
thinking,
yeah.
well, maybe I can sell rides and that's how I'll make enough money to buy hay or whatever. We already had horses, so I'm sure I could have pilfered some of the hay from the horses. But
Mm.
my father was not pleased about a camel coming to Hyde Park.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, but I mean, now that we're on the topic of Israel and all that, of course, that nowadays is again a very touchy subject, and also one that I mean, well, has never really simmered down from those
Yeah,
times. And I mean, I'm kind of wondering what Eleanor's stance would be on the situation now, and what she'd propose to do in this situation, because naturally she was very involved there, and she advocated a lot for a solution that benefited all parties involved. But apparently, it didn't work out as well as it could have. So,
No, you're right. And it's so hard to project what she would be thinking based on, her involvement in, from the teens to the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and definitely during 1947 when Israel became a state, and then into the 60s. And now we're, in 2025, and it's always been simmering.
mm,
Excuse me.
nah, no
But
worries.
I think that um, she would want all of us again to continue paying attention and trying, and I'm sure she would be encouraging the leaders to respect. And that was her thing between the Palestinians and the Israelis, was respect for each other's cultures, and other Arab nations who were all against Israel becoming a state.
Mm,
And that's what she spent most of her energies doing. And I remember we had a meeting, we had lunch on his kibbutz with Ben Gurion. And that's what she was focusing on, was respecting the cultures of the Palestinians. Now, at the same time, we were at a kibbutz where we had to be really careful because they were still shelling this particular kibbutz in the north of Israel from
mm.
Lebanon. And so of course, we would say, oh yes, we need to respect this culture as they kill us down here. But Grandmere, no, she understood that was tough, and she knew. I mean, we were there, and the shells were, coming from the Lebanese border. But it was kind of a way of life, and they weren't really trying to kill you. They were just trying to say,
We don't want you here.
here, right? and so it's so hard to know how she would react to what's happening now, and I'm glad she doesn't have to.
Yeah, I think this is a situation where, of course, there's a lot of very extreme positions, and I suppose it also depends on how you got your information about the situation. So naturally, things have changed in the meantime. Things have
Yeah.
happened, and it's not just old grievances from 1947 that are flaming up again, but it's really just a bunch that happened over the last, well, give or take 80 years.
Mhm.
So I guess it's difficult to say, but would you at least say that her message, regardless of any specific conflict, say it be it Israel and Iran or Israel and Palestine, would be respect and just simply to have a mutual understanding?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was her thing, and humans have rights, and she was
Mhm.
definitely a strong supporter of cultural as well as individual rights.
Yeah. Well, actually, speaking of rights and humans having rights, I suppose. Not just as her just because of her trips to the Middle East, but also because she still very much was a part of the World War II era and the aftermath of World War II. Seeing all the horrors that the Nazis committed and all the atrocities the Japanese and Nazis, also Italians, all the atrocities they committed. Um, what would her view be on what is becoming of the US today? Because I mean, it it must be said that in the US now again we have more extreme opinions which align. more closely with the ideals of the likes of the Nazis, which is, of course, a very scary topic.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I think she would. It's so hard to, project what anybody would think many
Of
years
course, of
after their
course.
death, but just knowing her morality levels, she'd be horrified and saddened, so saddened
Um,
that voices are not being heard. Um, and and I know she would because right after the war, the Second World War, I mean, well, she even during the war, she learned German because she wanted to understand more about German, and I had a piano teacher who then would I would have my piano lesson, and then he would go and speak German with her and work on her German. So
okay.
she immediately embraced that another. Now she was fluent in French, spoke a tiny bit of Spanish. She could
Mhm.
understand probably more than she was willing to actually speak. And
Mhm.
she could speak German. Now, she
Yeah.
wouldn't be as fluent as you are because
Yes.
she is certainly
Mm.
not bilingual, but that was important to her, the language of the enemy. I mean, and that sort of
Mhm.
says something about her, I think, too. Um,
Yeah.
and and right after the war, she and Lady Reading and various other people, they were lots of energy expended in helping refugees, helping rebuilding. So the past was the past, but we're rebuilding and we're going forward. And I think that was always her feeling that she wasn't going to carry this anger or whatever. And she'd seen, you know, soldiers blown up. She had seen some of the horrors, and then
Mhm.
she saw the horrors of children that were orphaned and no place to go, and families that were completely split up. But all of her work after the war really was in pulling these things back together and allowing them in their way to go forward. So
Yeah. I mean, okay, so now, sort of as out of the perspective of someone who grew up mostly in Germany, I am kind of curious because at least to me, it does seem like maybe, well, not just the US, actually, a lot of the Allied countries had this victor's mentality, or at least have it now, that, oh, fascism, Nazism, this never could have happened to us. That's Germany that did Nazism. And I'm just wondering, was Eleanor someone who was strongly advocating for the US realizing that this was not a German specific problem. This was not something that could just happen to certain countries, but could very well happen in the US as well, as we're at least to some extent seeing now, and of
but
course, which
given
is also
given
very
what I know about her, and I think if you look at the Declaration of Human Rights, it's sort of in there that
Mhm.
she knew this could happen anywhere. The minute you uh, look at other human beings as less than or not worthy of, then you can get the fascism, the authoritarianism, all these things. And I think that she definitely would not have, she, of course, everybody has to blame Germany, but it's
Mhm.
not a blame game. It's what kind of evolved through economics, through social interactions, through all kinds of things. And yes, it not only can, but will and does and is happening other places. And I think she
Yeah.
knew that very well. She was, among other things, she was a really shrewd politician. and
Mhm.
she saw it more things that could happen in the future. And I think in her way, she was trying to build relationships so that it didn't happen that way.
Yeah. Yeah, especially with all these nations where there's still a lot of bad blood going around and a lot of prejudice against them, basically
It's
just for their
centuries,
skin
yeah,
color
that's,
and also just for the place they were born in, which is still a huge issue today. I mean, looking at especially how Latinos and people from Central and South America are being treated simply because they were not born in the U.S. uh, I guess the goal of just seeing everyone as equal and seeing everyone as a person is still very important and is something that is of course very important to strive for.
yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And the lessons that, you pick apart various leaders' lives and hers, when you sort of look at her life and the small things she did, the big things she did, all the things she did, she may have been wrong about some things, um, but it was this idea that we have to keep vigilant. We have to keep going in a direction that is full, has value, and respects the values of other people.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's more or less the lesson of her life and the goal of her
Yeah,
life, isn't it?
yeah. Wait, I have a question for you.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Because you come from both sides of your family are accomplished people who have contributed
Yeah.
a great deal to their communities, their families, their society. And then you have this one side of the family that's a little bit lopsided because they were, had a lot more notoriety and whatever.
Mhm.
How does that affect you as a young person, um, in your everyday life, in your sort of dreams of where you want to be or things that you want to do? And I think it really, it's both sides of your family, but the Roosevelt bit probably stands out a little. uh,
It does, at least to a certain degree. I mean, on the German side of my family, I don't think there's too many people who would be as notable, especially when it comes to just broad history. I don't think
yeah,
there
but
are
there are people who,
too
my
large parts to
grandmother is
play.
one that, they have worked hard in their communities,
Of
they've
course,
done things.
it goes without saying that while they may not have been as prevalent on the broad world stage or even a national stage, they definitely contributed to their communities, and they of course were no less ambitious in their endeavors in helping the people around them.
Mhm.
Although not always. I mean, especially toward like the 1940s, I guess. That might not be entirely the case, but yes. I mean, all right. Back to your question. Personally, I think that actually, before I answer that, I'm gonna just turn on the lights real quick because it's getting quite dark. It's just been
Okay.
continuously, it's been getting a tiny bit darker and darker. Now you can barely see the wall behind me anymore, so I'm just going to turn on some lights.
Okay.
All right, so generally, I'd say that there's definitely a lot of pride that goes into having such a rich legacy when it comes to both my German and my American side. I mean, I'm very proud to be a part of a family which historically has done bad things. I mean, we were a part of the opium trade. I do believe we also engaged in the slave trade. But at the same
That's the
time, we had
Roosevelt
people.
side, right? Make sure
Yes.
that,
Yeah.
yes.
On my German side, we also I did
Oh, okay.
bad things. Um,
Okay.
but I guess on my German side, at least there weren't any notable bad guys. It was just they were German. They did their part. They fought in the war. But generally, I mean, I'm very proud to, be part of a family which already 80 years ago did not pay attention to skin color very much and did not judge people according to that. And same goes for like being related to Teddy or FDR because those were some great people for which were monumental for their time, and I think they were in a lot of ways just ahead of their time since Teddy was also conservative in a sense, but he also did a lot of things which liberals thought were all right, and conservatives were then not so on board with. But I don't think any of those legacies affect my personal decisions. It's more of a nice anecdote to have. It's something that I take pride in, but it's not something that I really see as important for my future. I mean, I do try and of course learn the lessons of our ancestors, and I try to, of course, be as compassionate as Eleanor and continue being a good person to just keep up the I guess the streak of good people in our family. But aside from that, I don't really necessarily want to go into politics simply because my ancestors were in politics or um, anything like that. I mean, occasionally the thought has crossed my mind of just kind of going back to New Deal policies and going into politics because I personally do not like Reaganomics at all. And so the thought has crossed my mind, but generally I say that becoming a physicist or doing something physics related is not an idea that came from any past generations.
No, but your curiosity
The curiosity
and
is probably,
your your way of being is definitely, I
well,
mean,
I think I would be a lot less open-minded if I was not part of this family. And that's something I'm very thankful for, of course, is just that of course the environment in which you're raised is gonna affect you as a person very intimately and being part of a family that is inclusive and supportive and open-minded while also trying to be compassionate to everyone and just strives to be decent human beings. That, of course, is something that I deeply cherish. And I guess that's also really what Eleanor was all about in the end is well, she was an accomplished politician and she was also a very well respected figure. Is in the end, what made her so great is simply her compassion, her empathy, and her open-mindedness in a time where being open-minded towards other races or other ethnicities just was not something you could really find in many places.
yeah, that's very true. The timeliness of what she did is interesting. And coming from, I mean, she came from a very sort of buttoned up type of family. I don't want to say they're conservative, but they were very traditional and not ready really to take risks and that kind of thing. The
Well, I
Delanos,
mean,
yes, the Delanos,
I guess restrictions do apply there, but in
yeah.
the grand scheme of things, I think you are right that they weren't the ones to test the waters on new ideas, and that definitely was something that Eleanor did on a regular
Mhm,
basis.
mhm.
Yeah.
Well, do you have any other things you want to know? I mean, well, no, I'm sure there's tons of things you want to know,
I
but
mean, there are
about
tons of
this.
things that I still want to know, but maybe on a little bit of a funnier note, I always love hearing stories of just funny things that happened, like with the Queen of Greece or
Oh,
things like that. So, of course, if you have any such stories to share, I'd love to hear them.
well, the Queen of Greece, yeah, that was sort of bizarre. The Queen of Greece came to Hyde Park to visit my grandmother, and so we had this big luncheon at Valkill. Now I was in cold weather, so I had a coat on, and I came into the room where we would take our coats off and leave them, and my brother was there, and I had long braids at the time,
Mhm.
and my brother was always a pest. And so he was always, yanking my hair, and it just drove me nuts. So anyway, I'm taking my coat off and not paying any attention. I knew Haven was in the room, and suddenly I felt this yank on my braid, and I just turned around and I, stop that! I was furious, and I looked, and it was some lady, and I thought, ooh, well, okay. Anyway, she then left the room. Well, I didn't know who she was. Then I come out of the room and into the gathering, sort of before luncheon. And my grandmother said, oh, Nina, I just want to introduce you to this is Queen Frederica, the Queen of Greece. And it was the same woman who pulled my braid. And the Queen said, yes, we've already met. And I just sort of somewhat shriveled, but I was still not, pleased. We did then have lunch again with the Queen of Greece years later. When
She remembered, didn't she?
what? Oh, she remembered, and we were in Greece, so we had lunch. It was at their summer home, and my father well, the whole family went to Greece. It was a humanitarian trip thing, and my brother and I and my sister were allowed to go, and it was really fun. But anyway, so we walk into the, summer palace of the Queen of Greece, and she said, "Oh, you've cut your hair." And I thought, "Oh yes, you did remember," because by then I didn't have long braids; I had
Yeah, yeah.
grown up a bit. But
So then it was just this awkward, like, ah, ha, ha, yes, you still
yes,
remember
right.
that, do you?
But and almost every um, head of state that I met, they were always so down to earth and nice, like Queen Juliana of the Netherlands. She was just like my grandmother, sort of this, roundish, lovely, nice woman. And even when I had tea with it was the Queen of England,
Mhm, yeah.
my grandmother and me, and she found out that I liked honey because we were having tea and there was honey. And I said, oh, I love honey. She said, oh, you do? I said, yeah, it's one of my favorite things. And so she called the butler in and had the butler go get honey from all over England. So then I was sort of faced with all these different honeys. Now, what am I supposed to do? Am I going to sit here and just taste honey all day or something? I didn't know what to do. But anyway, it was very kind of her to do. And so we always, we had a wonderful time. One story that's not in the book, and it's not in the book because I was not there, but it is a story that my grandmother shared with me, so I know it's true. She went to visit a village in Africa. The missionaries in Africa, it was a very small village, and Grandmere was in Africa anyway, and they wanted her to come. So she did. And so she flew in to this village, and then she was supposed to meet with the women mostly and talk about health and
Oh, I think I
family
know the
life.
story.
Right, you do know this story, but anyway, so she, the missionaries, the women in this village, it's warm, it's hot, and so they don't typically wear much in the way of clothes. They might have a sarong, something around their waist, but that was about it. So definitely bare breasted and nothing else. Okay. So my grandmother comes, the missionaries tell the women, this famous woman is coming to visit you, and she's from the West. And in the West, they tend to cover up their top so that their breasts don't show. Oh, okay, fine. So anyway, Grandmere's plane comes, lands. She gets out of goes down the steps from the plane. There's no fancy airport. And she's walking towards the women. And as soon as she gets pretty close to where the women are all lined up to greet her, they all pick the bottom of their sarongs up and cover it up to their chest, up to their chins. But of course, there's nothing on the bottom.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Grandmere just didn't even so much as think twice about it. Human anatomy is human anatomy, and off she went. But I always thought that was, the fact that she didn't make a big deal about it or didn't care and that kind of stuff. She just thought it was, that's the way they are. I mean, because she'd been in Africa many times before.
Yeah.
And seen villages where people often didn't wear anything. So, but anyway, so that was one of my favorite stories.
Yeah, I guess that's something very valuable because even today, or maybe especially today, a lot of people would look at this and point it as being just very primitive and animalistic, and of course, then somehow try and dehumanize people simply because their culture doesn't align with Western culture and Western norms.
That's an
Um,
interesting point. I
so-
think even today, you may be right, Haven, because people do. They get very upset if they think, people aren't doing what they
Well,
think.
I mean, people get upset. People already get upset when people wear hijabs or stuff like that. So it doesn't take a lot
That's true.
to show
That's
people's
true.
wraths.
So, Haven, any more questions that you wonder about?
Hmm. Actually, I did write some down. I might want to check with those at some point. Like I wrote all these down, and then I just realized that I didn't want to be reading any of this, so I just ended up asking questions that came to mind. But actually, I think I asked most of this. Hmm. Just trying to think of one last question to finish things off here. Uh, because of course Eleanor was very famous, especially during the later stages of her life. When it comes to just post World War II, but naturally she herself grew up in a very different era, which was I guess the late 1800s.
Yeah.
So
Um,
naturally, that was again just a astronomically different time from even the 1940s, and
mhm.
actually by that logic, it's just a huge leap from modern day and our society today. So what are sort of stories from Eleanor from her childhood that stuck with you, and what can you kind of still remember from stories she told when told about her growing up?
Well, she didn't really talk that much about her growing up. She adored her father. She did mention her father quite a bit. And we began to learn about her childhood mostly. Um, well, this is probably, well, I'm going to say it anyway. I noticed that my grandmother's toes were kind of scrunched back. And I asked her one time, and she said, well, I my feet kept growing, but we didn't always have time to have get new shoes, and so my feet often were scrunched in my shoes because she at that time in her growth, physical growth,
Mhm.
was living with her unmarried, marriageable age aunts and two uncles and her younger brother. And her grandmother was trying to take care of all these children. So worrying about shoes, for the younger ones was kind of on the back burner. So when I
Mm.
asked Grandmere about her toes being scrunched, now that's something that kids might notice of their parent or grandparents, and she just said, well, they just didn't have time for shoes. It wasn't so much money, but it was time. And what I learned from that was that she was pretty much alone, and she used to make sure that I had lots of books because much of my childhood was also very much separated from my parents.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I did have my younger sisters there, but most of my life was, on my own. And but Grandma made sure I had lots of books to read, and she would always say, when you want just these are well, she signed us up for a book a month or something like that, and but she'd always ask me about them too. So
Mhm.
that's when I began to realize that she understood a lot of things about my own childhood and some of the difficulties that
Mhm.
my siblings and I had with our parents. So it was interesting.
All right. So there weren't
So
any.
she became that. I think that's one of the reasons that I gravitated to her so much, was because it really um, she sort of got it or got me, and I could talk to her. I could say things. I never complained about my parents. She did one time. She and my aunt sat me down, and they wanted to know specifics about why we were having lots of troubles and why one of my sisters was having a lot of trouble. And that's the only time she ever, asked anything. And
Mm.
I was completely, I could be open with her. Um, so,
Yeah.
so
So
anyway,
so
it
there
was,
weren't really
hmm?
so there weren't really any childhood stories that you were particularly fond of and loved to listen to
No,
when
not really, because
children.
she didn't really have any wonderful stories
Oh, okay. Okay.
because her childhood was pretty lonely.
Okay. Okay. So then she made sure that would not happen to you, did
Yeah,
she?
right. She was going
Yeah.
to help give me all the tools that she might not have had. And I think that's another reason she was so glad when we all moved to live at Valkill. And because
Mm.
then there were always people around, and very often, my second cousins, the Elliots, were always there. Well, always in the summertime.
Yeah.
So, and then John Bodiger was there a lot, and Chris Roosevelt and Frank, his brother. So I think she just made sure that, and at one point my parents talked about moving closer to New York City, and I think she's the one that put the kibosh on that. And so we,
Yeah, I think you wrote about that in your book as well,
yeah,
that was
right.
part of the
So,
discussion.
so I was so lucky. I mean, it was just a wonderful um,
Mm.
relationship. Even if she
Yeah.
hadn't been famous, she was a fabulous grandmother. She wasn't a great mother, but she was a fabulous grandmother. So,
Mhm. Okay. Right. Well, I guess that pretty much wraps up my questions.
Well,
Uh,
thank you for
I
asking, Haven, and thank you
yeah, yeah.
for your
Thanks for
interest
telling all these
in,
stories.
well, and just make sure somehow we can keep the legacy of
Yeah.
what Eleanor Roosevelt stood for
Well,
in people's minds.
speaking of legacy, I feel like then I might want to still ask just to wrap things up, what in short is Eleanor's legacy and what is something that people, I suppose maybe even people, especially my age, should really take to heart and learn about Eleanor because I doubt most people know much about her. So what's just one thing that most of all people should know and people should remember?
Well, uh, from my point of view, the thing people should know is that she wasn't born as a public figure. She had to force herself and learn how to do it. But it was because she saw the need, she saw how she could be useful to others, that she made sure she grew in that direction. And then her values and her moral stability and her willingness to open her mind as well as her heart with boundaries. I mean, she wasn't just a complete, absorbing everything. That she has contributed to human a human life in a way that we just can't forget and that we need to keep working on. So it's not a story that's over and we're still have a long way to go. But
Yeah,
she
that's
led
exactly why
us,
I'm asking because it's up to us now to
yes, yeah,
continue that journey and to continue what Eleanor started, which in my opinion is a cause that is not only admirable, but even 80 years later is still something that we need to be striving for and is still very much holds true. So yeah, I mean that's why I'm so glad to have interviewed you, and I think that this is a great thing to just learn about Eleanor and her goal, so that maybe me or whoever then finds out about Eleanor's legacy can continue that journey.
yeah. Well, and that's so true, and I think that's why this is important
Yeah.
for
Well,
future generations.
exactly. Well, then I think
Well,
I personally thank you for your time, and I'm
well,
very thankful to
thank
have done
you,
this.
dear Haven, and much love to you. And
Yeah,
I
love you
always
too.
love talking to you, and I always love seeing you. And
Same
I
goes for
just
me. Same goes for
think of
me.
you with great love always.
Yeah.